before I mention, or before I proceed, Mr. Speaker, let it be in record, Mr. Speaker, that personally and the other members chaired by the Speaker, we sat in the House Business Committee that schedules the works or the business that is to be transacted by the House, Mr. Speaker. We sat at exactly around 7:30 a.m. in the morning, Mr. Speaker, and we did schedule the business that is before the House today, Mr. Speaker, for discussion and deliberations, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, number two is that, Mr. Speaker, according to the standing orders of this House, Mr. Speaker, the first session starts at 9:30 a.m. in the morning, Mr. Speaker, and it should end at 12:30 p.m., Mr. Speaker, not unless with the exception, like for today, Mr. Speaker, when we have a lot of business is when we have to extend time by moving a motion and adopted by the House for the same discussion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the councils that appeared before the House, Mr. Speaker, led by Katwa Kigen, Mr. Speaker, they came here knowing, Mr. Speaker, that they are coming to defend His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very sure that they came here knowing that there is no order, Mr. Speaker, that on the way, Mr. Speaker, they wanted to introduce the same, Mr. Speaker. You know the law. Once the session started, Mr. Speaker, there is no way, this is a special motion, there is no way we could terminate this, Mr. Speaker, and I beg that we proceed with the same, Mr. Speaker, until its conclusion, Mr. Speaker. That is my observations, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in supporting the same motion that is before the floor of the House, Mr. Speaker, I want to start with the issue of revenue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for our people back at home who entrusted us with the responsibility of representing, Mr. Speaker, legislating on their behalf, Mr. Speaker, and oversighting the executive on behalf of them, Mr. Speaker, mandated us to do, or the Constitution mandates us to do the three roles, Mr. Speaker. That is oversight, legislation, and representation, Mr. Speaker. And when we see misappropriation, Mr. Speaker, and things done away from the law, Mr. Speaker, is when we need to raise the red flag, Mr. Speaker, and inform the public that something is not doing good, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I happened to have worked for Safaricom Limited, Mr. Speaker, where they encourage cashless transactions, Mr. Speaker, and that is one of the leading telecommunication industries, Mr. Speaker, which one of them, I'm not saying I have interest in the same, Mr. Speaker, but after the county government advertised after the lapse of the riverbank, Mr. Speaker, I even don't know, Mr. Speaker, where PPRA are there, Mr. Speaker, because this is against the law, Mr. Speaker. When a contractor wins a tender, Mr. Speaker, they needed to have given that person or that company the same rules, Mr. Speaker, to collect for us the money, Mr. Speaker, in terms of revenue. The county government, if we are to progress, we must have the revenue system back, Mr. Speaker. But failure by the executive to provide the same 11 months down the line, Mr. Speaker, seems or means they don't want this system in place, Mr. Speaker, because they want to loot the money that belongs to the people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I come from the farthest ward of this Kericho County, Mr. Speaker. When accessing medical services, Mr. Speaker, I need to come. If somebody gets an injury or broken hand or everything, Mr. Speaker, we need to come back all the way to Kericho County, Mr. Speaker. I was overseeing, or I was seeing that if we could have proceeded in the right way, Mr. Speaker, we need to have even installed the X-ray systems and machines in the sub-county hospitals that we are coming from, Mr. Speaker. But because of the theft in the county government, Mr. Speaker, of these issues to do with revenue, Mr. Speaker, you see, we are still there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the county referral hospital, all the roofs, Mr. Speaker, at the maternity wings, Mr. Speaker, are leaking. People are sharing beds, Mr. Speaker, in the same referral hospital at our time, Mr. Speaker. You can imagine, Mr. Speaker, for this to end, we must execute this impeachment like yesterday, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this county assembly has passed several laws, Mr. Speaker, and it has been enacted by the county governor, Mr. Speaker. You see, when we pass a bill here, Mr. Speaker, after it has been accepted by the governor, Mr. Speaker, it becomes an act which the governor is bound to operate within the same act, Mr. Speaker. This county assembly, Honorable House, Mr. Speaker, passed a valuation rule, Mr. Speaker, in the year 2019. Before its finality was, Mr. Speaker, executed, we entered into this election, Mr. Speaker. After coming up, Mr. Speaker, coming back in 2022, we expected that the county government will use the new valuation rule that only lands department was found maybe to collect close to 1.2 billion, Mr. Speaker, as revenue, Mr. Speaker, from land rates and other things, Mr. Speaker. But to date, Mr. Speaker, you can see the total collection as per the control of budget reports, and for the Auditor General's report, Mr. Speaker, we collected only 359 million. That is inclusive of those other revenue streams, Mr. Speaker. To me, for this county to progress, Mr. Speaker, His Excellency Dr. Erick Mutai, Mr. Speaker, should be impeached, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to talk much of the honorable members of this House, Mr. Speaker. It's uncalled for a state officer of the caliber of His Excellency the Governor to call my colleague that is mentally stupid, that people ought not to have elected such a person, Mr. Speaker, that is acting as the MC of Kapkatet at the same time working as a governor, Mr. Speaker. That one, Mr. Speaker, is degradation of the rights of an honorable member and a human being, Mr. Speaker. The same, Mr. Speaker, as I finalize, I was in the special committee, or rather committee on Londiani accident, Mr. Speaker. I felt so bad, Mr. Speaker, when the governor referred to us as a funeral committee, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I have sat in committees in my rural home as a funeral committee, but for that case, Mr. Speaker, I sat as an honorable member in a committee, special committee formed to investigate the same issues of Londiani issues, Mr. Speaker. We recommend to His Excellency the Governor that people that was involved in the same theft, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, you see the way we lost money. I'm one of the person I went maybe to Nakuru Beach Edge Hospital, Mr. Speaker, and Honorable Excellency Susan Kericho, Mr. Speaker, pronounced herself that no bill of the same, because of the magnitude of that incident, Mr. Speaker, She waved at the PGH hospital, Mr. Speaker. Coming to our own county, Mr. Speaker, the governor himself pronounced himself, and eventually, Mr. Speaker, they went ahead and billed 2,037,524 for Kericho County Referral Hospital, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, 1,534,190 for Londiani Sub-County Hospital, Mr. Speaker. This one came to a total of over 4 million, Mr. Speaker. And we have the evidence of the checks from the same account, Mr. Speaker. It was so painful. We saw people who got injured, Mr. Speaker. I know of many who still today, Mr. Speaker, doesn't have legs. Though the same people came and sourced money from other accounts of this county government after the staff of the county executive had exploited the same, Mr. Speaker, from the people. Mr. Speaker, for all this to progress, Mr. Speaker, you've had the report, Mr. Speaker. And when we were in primary, there was a book called Primary Science. I think it was standard 6 to 7, Mr. Speaker. There was what we called the food web, Mr. Speaker. And they used to say, in the food web, Mr. Speaker, they were saying, the pointer points to the eater, Mr. Speaker. I end my quote, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honorable Chief Food, the Honorable Rotich.